All right, we're live with Zack Yurch. He's the VP of Retail Sales for Agency Revolution. I met Zack about 2 years ago. We started chopping it up over selling websites because that was a big similarity we had. And now we've just stayed in touch. And I wanted to get him on to talk about some of his sales prowess and what he has going on. So, Zack, I appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks. You nailed it with the last name pronunciation and the title. Great
Yep,
job.
I know.
I was
I
off
got
to
it
a
written
good
down.
start.
I couldn't mess it up this time.
I saw you look at the notes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all good. So I guess I want to lay the foundation because I've obviously had some conversations with you, and most of the time when I run into people, my takeaway isn't, wow, I really want to work with this person at some point because I know that they're better than me in certain ways. When I walked away from my first conversation with you, I was just like, holy shit, if I could ever work with Zack, I'd be so down.
Awesome. Appreciate that.
And we're in a weird industry, right? We work with a lot of old people, and I feel like we're two of the younger guys, which is good for us. But how did you get into the world of insurance? Was it something you did right out of college, or did you work somewhere else first?
Yeah, so I great question. My first job out of college was selling plastic retail fixtures. So it was literally the first job that would take me. I had some student loans to pay. The guy that I interviewed with told me no initially because I did not wear a tie to the interview. So it was one of those places where like the CEO of the company would come up to you. If I had scruff like this, he would come up to me and like literally do this to my cheek and be like, "What's that?" And calling with an old school phone off of a printed out spreadsheet, right? Mm-hmm. So did that for almost 3 years. And I was like, dude, there's gotta be something better than this. You know what I mean? Like I was pretty good at sales, at least I thought I was. And I was always kind of figuring out different ways to get to the close, right? So I was talking to some of my buddies from college, and one of them, his name's Adam Budd. He was actually working at a place called the Shipyard, or it was like Allied Digital Marketing Solutions at the time. And he was selling websites for insurance agencies, right? So, and I was just like, what? And then he told me, he's like, yeah, I'm actually making commission. I was like, well, I'm not making commission. So like, let's take a look, And I was living in Cleveland at the time, living literally with my mom right out of college. I'm like, well, anything could be better than this, love you, mom. But, it's not really something a 22, 23-year-old wants to do. So talked to him about it. Wasn't sure I was going to take the job because it was actually a cut in pay. And it was hourly, right? So I was getting paid hourly. I think it was like $10 an hour or something like that, plus commission. Then I was just like, all right, whatever, let's do it. Didn't have a place to live. Stayed on my buddy's, brought down my mattress and slept in like a den in my buddy's house, right? So like he lived in the upstairs. Like the upstairs was like his bedroom. It had like a full bath and everything. And he would actually come downstairs through my bedroom to get out of the house, right? So it wasn't really a bedroom, just a den. Lived there for about 6 months and then finally got an apartment. But yeah, so from there, I don't know how much of the story do you want me to go into.
Is that where you made the jump from there to Forge 3 into the insurance?
Yeah, so I was there for again another 2 or 3 years, and I mean, again, great company. I still am in touch with a lot of people there. I mean, it was this weird, like, I feel like incubator for the Insurtech industry, right? Because back then we would go to a conference and there were like 4 tables at a conference, right? And each person did one thing, and 2 of those tables were like Vertafore and Applied, right? So they were already billion-dollar companies, but everybody else, we were small fries just coming in. And then after that, I mean, I had some great leadership. So Callan Harrington, again, still close with him, but he was like our VP of sales at the time. And I was just a sales rep. And I knew that I wanted to do more, but there was just like no place to go up from there, right? So really hard decision, but I saw Forge 3 at a conference and great product and everything like that, great company. And so I was just like, all right, they don't have any salespeople. You know what I mean? Like I got to get in there. So I reached out to Jeff Teschke, who's the founder there, and went through the whole interview process. It's kind of weird because this was like 2016, 2017, and they were all fully remote. So now this is like a standard thing, you know what I mean? Everybody's remote. But I'm just talking to some guy in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and all my friends are like, is this even a real like company? Like, you know what I mean? Like, are you sure you're gonna get paid? Like, you never met this guy? Like, you never like met him face to face or anything? So I took that job and we were sort of off to the races. I mean, Jeff was genius. Worked with Monica Barriquette there too. She was like I think her title was COO. Great from an operations standpoint. So we kind of had all the pieces in place of like operations. Jeff was marketing, and then I was sales, right? And we grew that from 3 or 4 employees to I think we were like 35 or something like that before I left. And then from there went to Semsi. It was a little bit of a different vibe, right? Great company, but it was a startup, right? Whereas Forge 3 was bootstrapped, and we were, living off of our own revenue. And so there's good and bad when it comes to a startup, right? So it's good because you basically have all this money not money to burn, but like to spend, right? So they're like, all right, let's just throw things against the wall and see what sticks. Let's try it out. We've got money to use. But then you also have people that can pull your strings from like an investor standpoint, right? So I didn't really like that as much. Although at the time, again, I was younger when I was at Forge 3, and I've told Jeff this day. I was like, at the time, I was like, I want to grow fast. Right? But then because you're young, right? And you're not risk averse. You are just like, all right, let's go for it. We got something good going. Let's press it as hard as we can. But you realize the downside of that once you do take on like investors or things like that. And I've told you that personally, right? I was like, just be careful what you do, right? Not that it's all negative, but just make sure that you're clear on like expectations and like what they control and then what they want from you. And then actually, so I was at SEMC for 3 years, and I've built sales teams along the way at each company and built the CRM and all that stuff. And then now I'm actually back at Agency Revolution, who acquired Forge 3 back in the day, to head up the sales team here and kind of work on their sales process and grow this as much as possible. So kind of like awesome. A reunion.
That was a good recap. I want to go all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Did you sell stuff before you started selling stuff as a career? Like, were you selling textbooks in college? Were you selling McDonald's cheeseburgers to underclassmen? What was
when I was like, I want to say 11 or 12, I was buying MP3 players off of Alibaba, like in bulk.
Oh, shit.
And I was reselling them on eBay, right? I was like always buying stuff at like a garage sale, right? Reselling it. Like back in the day, had a lemonade stand, bought my first CD. It was Big Willie Style by Will Smith.
Yeah.
Ever, but like it had Miami on there, which was a banger at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then so all of that stuff is kind of tied together. So I have this like entrepreneurial spirit, which kind of gets me in trouble sometimes because I'm just always thinking of something new to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've a friend of mine, Dustin Boss, in the insurance industry, he calls me the king of expandable hoses because at one time I was selling expandable hoses on Amazon, and I was actually the number one item in home and garden on Amazon for about 3 days.
Damn. Yeah. That's something to hang your hat on. That's a worldwide marketplace right there.
Right. Yeah. But then, you learn a lot of valuable lessons, and I switched suppliers to actually try and save money.
Mm-hmm.
About half the hoses started just like popping.
Shit.
Reviews went down the tubes, but I've kind of had that spirit along the way.
Yeah, because I picked up on that, right? Like the conversations we would have, it felt like you knew how to hack things, get into a mindset where you're essentially just problem solving problems that don't exist for anyone else except for you. Because you go, if I can solve this shit, I'm going to win.
Right.
And that's why I was curious, because I had a similar background where I just wouldn't bring books to school. I would just bring soda. Yeah. And I would just start selling cans of soda for $1 around high school. And that's how I made all my money. Yep. But then when I heard just now you slept on your buddy's couch, like you did the whole entrepreneurship thing without actually founding a company. But you were, one of the first guys in, which you need is someone like that if you're going to found a company.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, I don't know. It's just fun, right? And that's again, it gets me in trouble sometimes, but it's also been my largest benefit is like, I don't have a lot of patience. And I also don't sweat the small stuff. I kind of just try to keep my momentum going as much as I can. And I let other people deal with the small stuff, right?
For sure.
Because there's that anxiety piece that some people like get into where they get into that like analysis paralysis stuff. And I'm like, dude, my thing has always been the worst decision is indecision, right? So let's make a call. Let's choose a direction to go in, and then let's go, and we can adapt as we go, right?
For sure.
Let's not sit here and do nothing and hope that something works out, because that's never worked for me. I don't know if it's worked for you.
No, I'm the same way. I like to just, I think at some point you realize that your intuition it tends to be correct, right? And I think when you come to that realization, you can make those decisions and be like, all right, odds are I'm going to be right, or I'm going to be in the ballpark, and I can fix the other things that kind of went off the rails. And I'm also a big fan. Like, we went through phases of Jumpsuit Group where we were trying to play defense, but every single time, if you just outsold the problem with new clients and new revenue, it ended up solving it somewhere else, right? Like, you could pump money into the solution to figure it out. And I think that's a big thing, is as long as you just keep pushing forward and playing offense, you end up being able to play defense with that.
It's important to have both sides of that though too, right? So I'll say that, like, again, Jeff was more risk averse at Forge 3, which was a good thing, right? Because like, if I'm just going off in all different directions. Like we may have been successful, we may not have, but he was able to do what a good CEO does and kind of be that compass for the company, right? Where it's like you are giving us the vision and the direction, and then I'm giving you the fuel to get there, right? Because I'm not the most creative person in the world. I can't like hack stuff, you know what I mean? But I'm not like I would never come up with a completely new product. You know what I mean? Like if you come up with an idea, I can tell you exactly how to sell it and how you should build it and who will buy it. You know what I mean? But I'm not going to be the guy that comes up with that initial product. And I've realized that over time. It's just, I don't know, just who I am. You know?
Got you. And so where along the line did you go from just selling stuff to starting to scrape together pieces of, oh, wow, I saw this guy do something successful here, this guy do something successful here. And then you put it into almost the equation that you have today that you've rolled out to Forge 30 SEMC, Agency Revolution.
So that's a good question. I'm trying to think of like an exact moment. I mean, it was really like, again, Callan Harrington at Shipyard, he was my first, like, I would say mentor, where he actually knew what he was doing, right? And that I don't mean that in like a bad way, but he kind of introduced me to all of these different sales tactics. Whereas before I was just going off of like my personality and like it wasn't really honed, right? And so I kind of saw how you can take someone that has a natural like talent at sales, and you can hone that, and you can like basically use that person, not use them, but like make them better at their craft, and also point them in the right direction to make them more successful, and then make your company more successful as well, right? And then over time, as I was doing that, I've also realized that like there are some great salespeople out there, but there's a lot of like good ones, you know what I mean? And what I mean by that is like a great salesperson might have like a 5% better close ratio than a good salesperson. But if you have one great salesperson and you have 20 good salespeople, the good salespeople win. You know what I mean? That's it. Over time, I've thought like, okay, well, if you can take, you know, what I do, because I was a great salesperson, right? And not to toot my own horn, I was pretty good at it. But I realized that like me being a solo producer I love it. I love closing a deal, right? There's nothing better than that feeling. But if I can take what I know and what I do and make other people get it at least like 80 to 85% of what I do, right? Some of them are even better than me, right? But if I can just take someone completely new and make them 80% as good as I was, then you can take that as a team and you're going to close a lot more business than you would solo, right? It's like that whole, I can't remember what the saying. It's like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, right? So if you can do that as a team, make people better, and then you can also take each person's personality and like their special skill from a sales standpoint, and then scale that up with activity, that is where that secret sauce comes into play, right? It's like personalization at scale, I guess would be the term I would use.
For sure. It is taking your brain and then communicating it to other people. Because I'm sure you look at someone and you go, hey man, you should probably sell like this, or you can see their talents, or where they over-index in something and under-index in another. How long does it take if you're kind of implementing your playbook with someone for them to get it, right? Can you tell after a month, after 3 months, after 6 months? What does that look like?
So it's usually like 3 months, right? And I'll say one thing too. There's just different types of salespeople. And so what I've learned over time is like I've worked with a lot of those different types, so I can figure out what works for each person once I get to know them a little bit better, right? And it kind of goes back to like you ever taken like a DISC personality assessment or whatever? Like
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. So like I'm D on that, where it's more like I'm just very direct. I like get to the point, and then that's how I sell too, right? I'm like, hey, this is you. You've told me this is what you need. This is what we have. This is how we fit your need. This is what your timeline is. Let's get this moving, right? And then there's people that are the I, which is more like the relationship style selling, where it's like more talking. And it's more you develop that rapport, that bond. And I do some of that, but I'm not really good at it because I don't have the patience, right? I don't have the patience to talk to somebody for half an hour about whatever. You know what I mean? It's just, I don't. It's just not how my brain works. If you can figure out at first which type of salesperson that is, then you can implement your playbook in a different way, right? I can say like, hey, I'm modeling you after X salesperson. And I always go back to people that like I initially worked with. So like, I'll throw a name out there. I don't know if you'll see this podcast or not. Bob McDermott. Shout out to Bob. He was probably the best salesperson I've ever worked with, right? And not because even better than me, although, this is recorded, but whatever, because he was great at it and he never got bored with the process, right? So that's the key is like, if you can figure out what works well for you and then you don't get bored of it and you can repeat it, that is going to be a recipe for success every time. Because what would happen was maybe 1 month I'd beat Bob, but then guess what? He was right behind me. And the next 3 months, he would destroy me because I drained my pipeline and I was back to square one. Whereas he's in there doing the same thing every day, which, I mean, he had a process, right? He would come in, he would check his emails, he would respond to all emails, he would have his scheduled calls, he would shut down his computer and restart it. This is back in the day of like the Windows computers that took like 2 hours to update, right?
Yep.
So he would make sure that he's ready for the next day and make sure that all follow-up tasks were done, and then he would start it all over again. Followed the script to a T. He would say the same thing on every call, but it worked, right?
Right.
And so that might have been the point where I realized like this is scalable, right? This is something that like if you can get somebody to do this over and over again, like that's where you win, right? Salespeople like to consider themselves artists, but really some people are. But if you're in a high volume industry, you're not, right? You're more of a, I don't know, I guess a scientist would be it because you want to figure out the formula that works and just repeat it, right?
Yeah. Figuring out that formula though, because if you're repeating the wrong formula, maybe it'll work, but it'll just work at a lower hit rate, right? You probably made the scripts for Forge 3 and you probably made the scripts for SEMC. How do you go about attacking a project like that? Or is it trial and error? Is it you have an idea off the cuff and you're like, okay, I think this is what pain points are. Yeah,
it depends on the product, right? So like SEMC, I wouldn't say it was easy, but it was easier because it was basically like a net new technology, right? It was a commercial rater in a time where nobody really had one to replace, right? So with that, you're basically just qualifying them. So the key is you figure out what is your ideal client profile, and then you just ask them questions about that. It's simple. From a prospecting standpoint, it's like, hey, and that's the most important script, right? Salespeople will tell you account executives are most important, closers, whatever. The SDRs and the prospectors or whatever you want to call them, they have the hardest job, right? And they have the most important job if it's done right. Like if so what you're doing is you're figuring out that basically qualified lead and how you get to the point where you're finding people that are the ideal client. So for us at SEMC, it was like, all right, the more commercial carriers you have, the better fit you are because we're selling a rater, right? So I had to find out a way to figure out, all right, how many commercial carriers do they have? If you've got over 5 carriers, you're probably writing a decent amount of commercial business, but we still need to make sure of that. And then we got to figure out how many people do you have from an employee standpoint, and obviously, can you afford it? So, I mean, those are the things you want to figure out is like, do they see value? Do they have the money? And then are they willing to make a decision relatively soon? Right? Depending on your sales cycle, that's what you have to decide. But those are the things that you have to figure out from a prospecting call. And then from a demo, it's really just about building value as you go and then getting that prospect to affirm that, yes, they see value in this. Because if you ask them, hey, is this something you can see yourself using at your agency? And they say yes 6 times throughout the call, it's pretty hard for them to say no to when you actually go for the close at the end, right? Because it's just like, okay, well, are you lying to me now or were you lying to me then, right? Like, and I would never say that on a call, but that's kind of the implication is like, well, you've said this is something you could use over and over and over again. You've also said this is something you can afford. You said this is something that you need. So by the time it gets to that close, it should be a foregone conclusion that that person is going to sign up, right? So that's why I say that putting that opportunity on the plate is actually the hardest part. So that's where the SDRs and the prospecting team comes into play.
So, the scene in Wolf of Wall Street when he makes that first call from the penny stock room and he sells the guy in Aerodyne Industries.
Yep.
And he's like, we have a cutting edge space technology, whatever. And he's reading the script. And then all of a sudden, everyone in the office has a script. When you figure that out, do you have your, hey, you got to drop this in there 3 times, drop this in there 4? Do you have the script you hand each salesperson?
Yeah. You follow the exact script when you start, right? So it's like, it's basically you want to memorize before you personalize. Again, that's where every salesperson thinks they're an artist. So it's like, hey man, stick with this first, right? Yep. You got to know what a wheel looks like before you reinvent the wheel. That's it. Like you can't come into a new job and think I'm going to outsell everyone. It's like, stick with the script, learn that, schedule a few meetings, and then you can start to make it your own because each person does have their own personality that fits better and they can add a thing or two. but you have to stick to that script that is like the foundation of what we're selling, right? And that's
Mhm.
always something that, we used to refer to it as like almost like a skeleton or like a road, right? Where if you get lost in a conversation because you're having hundreds of conversations a day, you can always go back to the script and say, okay, well, here's where I was at. Okay, I haven't covered this stuff yet, right?
Gotcha.
And that's the point where it's personalization at scale, where it's like, okay, I have to be able to make at least 60 calls a day.
Mhm.
This isn't an industry, at least not the size of deals we're selling, or even the size of deals you're selling, where you can get by with like, yeah, I'm going to make 10 calls a day and I'm going to have a unique conversation with each one of them. You know what I mean? It's just,
Right.
you're not going to build a successful business that way, or at least you're not going to grow at the scale that you want to.
So you hit those checkpoints to get those deals. You were talking about having like the BDR, the SDR, queuing them up for you. But at some point, what they're doing is probably your brainchild also, where it's how do they go about and get volume and get quality volume out there? Is it like, have you developed cold calls as your hammer? Is it emails? Is it a combination? How do you approach getting the volume to you?
Yeah, so it's a combination of all the above, right? So I'm a big fan of like you want to meet people where they want to be met, right? And if somebody doesn't pick up the phone, you're never going to sell them with a phone call, right?
Mhm.
So we incorporate emails, phone calls, sometimes LinkedIn messaging. I've tried that. Doesn't really work that well in our industry, to be honest, because not a lot of them are super active on LinkedIn, and also everybody gets a lot of LinkedIn spam.
Yeah, that's all I get.
It's becoming almost the same as email. I'm a big fan of the people that add emojis before their first name on LinkedIn, so you
Yeah.
can tell who's a robot and who's not. But because if you get a LinkedIn message that says like rocket ship Zach, I have something that it's great to connect with you. It's like, okay, well, I know you didn't send that. You just but yeah, so it's a combination of all the above, and that's where the automation comes in, right? So we have something set up. I don't want to give away too much of the secrets, where it's like an outsourced service where it's dialing, and then it ties in automated email sequences. And again, you lose some of the schedule rate, right? So like where you might go from like, all right, I schedule a demo every 30 calls, maybe it's a demo every 40 calls with this. If you schedule a demo every 30 calls and you're making 60 calls a day, you've got 2 demos that you scheduled, right? If you schedule a demo every 40 calls and you're making 200 calls a day,
Right.
that's 5 demos, right? Are you burning through a couple more leads because you're dialing more? Maybe, but I'll take 5/2 all day, every day, as long as they're going through that same qualification process, right? And the key is to get to no's as fast as you're getting to yeses, right? It's just as much about getting to people that say that they're not a good fit and you figure out they're not a good fit, so you don't have to call them anymore, as it is to getting to the people that are qualified.
Right. No, I agree. I always say like you just got to get an answer, or else you're going to be fucking, just barking up the wrong tree for a long time, which is good. So I see it all the time because I deal with agents directly. You are dealing with agents directly. I don't. Maybe you saw it more with Forge 3. Agents inherently just have a terrible sales process. There's a few here and there that are good. They have a CRM, but like some of our best clients and our biggest agents have like Excel spreadsheets or just a handwritten piece of paper, which blows my mind.
Yep.
So in terms of if you run into an agency like that or someone's hiring you to do that, speak to those people and say like, what would step one be? Would it be go out and find someone like you, just like hire a killer and change your whole culture? How would you deal with? And I think the next question is, how would you deal with people who are already in there, right?
So step one would be like, all right, so if you're an insurance agent and you don't have any like technology and you don't have any employees or anything like that, but you're relatively successful doing what you do, document what you're doing.
Yep.
Right. So it's as simple as write it down. This is what I do on a daily basis. Because a lot of salespeople develop their own process, but they never actually document it.
Yep.
Right. Where they're just like, hey, I check in with my tasks in the morning. And it seems like common sense. Right. But some people's minds don't work that way. So you have to assume that, like, this is going to sound, I guess, mean, but assume that people are idiots. Right. And I'm not saying people are idiots, but you have to create documentation that leans that way. You can't assume that they think the same way that you do. So if you come through and you know your process, document it, write down literally everything that you do, go plug it into Chat GPT and tell them to clean it up, and they'll clean it up. And then that's when you hire and you tell them, hey, this is your playbook, right? This is what you do, because you want them to replicate what you're doing. And then at that point, if you have someone that is doing that, you can start to work on your technology and you can start to work on your business rather than in your business on a day-to-day basis, right?
Yep.
So that's step 2 is figuring out the technology. Step 1 is figure out what are you doing, why is it working, and then write it down.
Mhm.
And then 2 is, okay, now I've got somebody that's doing something something at least 80% as successfully as I was, right?
Mhm.
And then now you have the time to say, all right, I am still working in the business, but now I have more time to say, all right, I'm going to work on this and build this to scale,
Right.
right? And that's where it comes down to like, also, what is their end goal? You know what I mean? Because some people just are like, hey, I want to grind it out for 5 to 10 years, and then now I've got a book of business, and I can take summers to go surf in Costa Rica, or
Yep.
something like that, right? So that's totally fine. So what is your end goal, and work backwards from that.
You keep using 80% as like if you can get someone 80% of the way there, is that something that you look at and you say like that's success, or is that just a number you're using for the sake of
So like I don't have it from like it's more of like a gut feel thing that I've seen just over the years, right? So I don't have like hard numbers to back it up, but just from people I've trained, like that's the point where I'm like, all right, that extra 20% is kind of like my special sauce. And each person has their own brand of that, right?
Yep.
So if I can figure out the stuff that they can replicate, that's what I mean is like, all right, make sure that you're doing all this stuff that I have tried that has worked.
Mhm.
And then you can add your own that is either going to make you perform better than I was, make you perform a little bit worse, or maybe the same. You're just getting to it from a different path. But in every process, there's like, and I keep using the number, but it's just, again, 80% of like, this is repeatable. You know what I mean? Like, there's not like a special, everybody likes to think that they're special, but 20% of what you do is special. 80% of it is either like hard work and repetition. And that's just what I've seen from successful people over time is they develop habits, and habits are repeatable by nature, right? So
Right.
someone else should be able to learn those habits.
For sure. And then what about when you run into someone who you identify them as like, this person is good. This is exactly what I'm looking for. Do you empower them to do more? Do you have a conversation sooner rather than later and say, hey, you're nailing it, keep going? Or do you let them kind of sweat it out a little bit and keep the effort train going? How does that work?
So depends on the person, right? So you have to be careful because early on in my career, I was like, I had a BDR, SDR, and they were making like 20 calls a day, right?
Mhm.
But they would book 4 demos a day, right?
Ah,
And I'm like, you can book a demo every 5 calls. All right,
yeah,
how can I get you to make 60 calls and book 12 demos, right? And it just didn't work that way, right? So
huh,
then they start making 60 calls and they start booking 3 demos, right? So you have to like dive a little bit deeper into what's making that person successful because there are going to be those outliers, right? And it's like, okay, well maybe they can make whoever 40 calls and then now you're booking 6 or 7 demos, right? What's
mhm,
the happy middle? Because they
right,
may have a specific process where they're doing a lot more research on each lead, and that's why they're making 20 calls a day, right? But at the end of the day, what I look at usually is like, are the results there? If they are, I'm kind of going to let you do your own thing. I'm going to prod you a little bit to try and like, hey, what more can I get out of you? Right.
mhm,
But if you're performing, then it's like, all right, just do your thing.
right,
If you're not performing, then it's simple. I look at activity and I say, well, you are, again, if it's an SDR, you're scheduling 1 demo every 50 calls. So while we're working on getting that number down, if your quota is 2 demos a day, I need you making 100 calls a day. So that's, you have to stick to controlling what you can control, and
mhm,
you can control your effort, right? Your level of activity. You
for
can't
sure.
control who picks up the phone. You can't control, honestly, your level of talent even. Hard work wins out over talent 99% of the time in sales.
Right.
Right? So,
Yeah, you hear the term bulldog a lot, right? Like
yeah.
you're a bulldog. They just their feet don't stop moving. And I think you see that a lot. And maybe it stops you at some point, but for the most part, you can get through a lot of it, especially if you stick to the script,
Yep.
whatever that framework is that's proven to work. What about concepts I haven't touched on that you find important? Is it this is where I want your brain to come to the table.
Yeah.
And if we did touch on things, that's fine. But
Yeah. I mean, I think we touched on a lot. What I've found like very, very successful is like you have to, and I don't even know if I'm going to describe this in the right way, or at least the way it like, I think of it, is figure out, yes, you have to figure out that ideal client profile, right? Which every company kind of knows. Yeah. These rookie mistake,
I
rookie
know.
mistake. But you have to figure out your ideal client profile, and every business knows that. And they're all just like, yeah, let's figure out, okay, we write insurance for people that have a house, 2 cars, and a boat, right? that's our ideal person, but you have to take it a step further and say, okay, well, how do I find those people, right? And how do I find those people to make sure that that data is correct? So that's the most important thing. A ton of companies out there that do it. Right now, we have our people manually research. There are companies like I think Cognizant is one where they do research, and it's like, we're looking at working with them where they have, I think it's like AI that researches off of LinkedIn, right? So I mean, I provide them with like a company's domain name, and they'll give me all the employees' titles, the college they went to, their LinkedIn profile, their email, their phone number, all that stuff. So it's all about just how do you find that data? Like, you take the ideal client profile, and then how do you actually find those ideal clients, right? And you'd
Gotcha.
be surprised with how many people are just like, from a B2B standpoint, they're just on Google Maps, searching. And
Yep.
there are better ways to do that.
For sure. Got you. All right. Outside of sales, back to your start. As I guess even as you were slinging Alibaba goods and stretchable hoses and all that shit, if you could look back and at any age give yourself a piece of advice, what would you tell yourself? It can be professional or not. It could be something about, hey, get this haircut 10 years before I got this haircut,
It would just be just patience, right? And again, I've said that that's like my biggest strength, but if I would have just waited on some things for like a week, you know what I mean? Like, there could have been a big difference. And sometimes things, you don't always have to be taking action. Just understand that, like, what I said before is like indecision is the worst decision. But sometimes you just have to stick on that path before you make a change. And that's what I've done sometimes is I haven't seen things all the way through, and I've pivoted too soon before
Right.
I realized that this was going to work out, right? So as I've gotten older, I've just realized, like, time is like, it's weird. Like, when you're in your 20s, you're like, I'm running out of time, whatever. Like, I got to do this fast, right? But then I'm in my 30s, I'm just like, well, like, not much has, a lot has changed, but also not much has changed over the last year,
Mhm.
right? So if I'm doing these things and I put these things into play, I need to be able to wait a month or 2 months to see how this is working out, reevaluate, and then decide, do I stick down this path or do I move, right? Whereas before, and I've worked with a lot of people like this still that are in their 40s and 50s that are still operating this way, where they're just like, well, that didn't work today. I need to do something different tomorrow. I guess you need a large enough sample size. So it'd be patience, but really a large enough sample size of what you're doing to know if it's working or not
For
before
sure.
you make a change.
That's wise. I think I struggle with that sometimes too, coming from a sports background where you would do all of this work, practice, strategy, but the game it told you how good you were at your job or how good the strategy was. And then if you got blown out, all of a sudden you're like, okay, that sucked. Obviously you have, you're closing deals and you have opportunities to score goals and whatnot, but there isn't a win and a loss that's that black and white, I find in
Right.
business. So it's hard to figure out when that time is. But I do agree with you on the fact that you need to let things play out to really get the amount of data you need to say this has worked this many times and has failed
Yeah.
this many times.
Well, that's the thing. It is from like a management and a leadership standpoint, you have to be decisive, but also patient so that people trust you, so that
Mm-hmm.
people respect you, that people want to follow you, right? And the more changes you make in a short amount of time, it kind of dilutes your authority a little bit and like the respect that your employees or peers or whatever have for you because it looks like you are unsure of yourself, right? That is not something you want in a leader of a company or whatever, of even a family. Like as a dad, a husband, and everything. Like, I want to be stable and I want to be decisive at the same time without being all over the place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to be the rock, right? Whether it's your family, whether it's work, whatever. If you're a leader, that's your job, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your job is to be the stable one that is like weathering the storm, pointing your troops, your employees, whatever, in the right direction, and then leading them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. We'll wrap it up on this last question because
Yeah.
I don't know if we can beat that statement.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. So this is non-business related. This is life related, spiritual. If you could prescribe something, not necessarily like a drug, but like an activity, a habit to everyone on the planet, what would you prescribe to everybody?
Miracle Morning by, what's the guy's name? Hal Elrod? No, maybe. Yeah. Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. So the times that I've been what I consider my most successful is when I have a great morning routine.
Awesome.
right? And that's from, I would say, from a work standpoint, right? Because right now I have a 2-year-old, don't really have a morning routine because like he's pretty much my alarm clock. So it's like I consider myself successful as a father, but like, and I'm successful still as a career, but like it's not like that's all that I have going on now. You know what I mean? And there are things that are more important. So that would be if it's somebody that like is early on in their career, or somebody that is like starting a new job, or somebody that like really needs to hone in and like laser focus. Read that book and then follow the Miracle Morning Routine. It's like it basically puts you in the right mindset for the day. So it's things like chug a bottle of water when you wake up, right? Pretty simple, because you're actually your most dehydrated when you're in the morning, like because you had slept all night, you haven't drank anything, and most people go ahead and drink a cup of coffee, which dehydrates you more. And when you're dehydrated, your brain works slower. It's just science. After that, there's like physical exercise. So whether it's push-ups, jumping jacks, whatever, right? There's meditation, and then like a vision board, and then like gratitude, right? So you just like basically say things out loud that you're grateful for in your life. All of these things like basically sharpen your mind for that day, right? So hydration, make sure that you're good, you're thinking straight. Physical activity gets your blood pumping. Vision board sets your mind towards the future to like aim towards your goals. Meditation just focuses you. Gratitude, basically, it just puts yourself in a positive mindset, right? You think about all the good things that you have, rather than we live in a world where everybody looks at social media and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't have what, Connor has, like he's got that cool guitar back there. I wish I had that, like I didn't get 100 likes on my Instagram. Like, who cares, dude? You know what I mean? Like you woke up this morning, you have a great job, you have all these things going for you. You're probably beating out 99% of the world.
Absolutely.
Right? So think about that before you think about what you're going to tackle for the day.
Awesome. I think as you start to hear a lot of these successful guys who are coming out and doing podcasts and almost just dumping their knowledge on the world, I think you see a lot of stuff with routine, morning routine specifically. Like everyone down to like, I don't know if you watched Rob Deerdeck back in the day. Have you tapped into his new business stuff?
No.
Dude, it's unbelievable what he's done. He's still the same like super hyper, really funny guy, but he has just turned into like an absolute animal in the world of business. And he talks so much about morning routines. And then you get into like everything you hear on like Joe Rogan and Huberman about like cold baths and meditations and whatever. But the thing is that, again, back to pattern recognition, when you hear enough really successful people talk about the same shit, you tend to be like, well, maybe I should start trying that because there's a reason they all like it and do it, given they have probably more time to do it because they're not beholden to things that, average folks are.
But here's the thing. They were doing it before they had all that stuff, right? That is what got them there. So you have to make the time. That is the key. And everybody has the same 24 hours. Dude. Like, you know what I mean? Nobody's got a 25th hour that they can tap into, But the thing is, too, for the morning routine, a lot of people are like, oh, I got to wake up at 4 a.m. and do all this. Like, not really, man. You make your schedule. Everybody's different, right? Me personally, I don't sleep a lot. It's just natural. Like I even before I had a kid, I'm going to bed at midnight or 1 a.m. I usually wake up at like 7, right? And if you want, you don't have to wake up at 4 a.m. You could wake up at 7 and still do the same stuff, right? Go to bed a little later. If I'm waking up at 4 a.m., I'd have to go to bed at 10, and I still wouldn't fall asleep till midnight. So I'm just wasting 2 hours. So let's figure out what works for you, but replicate it.
It's a morning miracle. I'm going to get it on Amazon.
Miracle Morning.
Morning.
It's a short read. It's like 70 pages. Like it's a good one. Cool.
Put it right next to your name and your title here.
There you go.
Man, I appreciate you coming on. That was fucking awesome. I'm going to hang this up, but we can hang online and talk for a second.
Cool. Sounds good.